There are moments in life when something happens, an event so precisely timed, so uncannily accurate, it makes you stop and wonder, was that just chance? Or is someone or something watching? This is not a story of conspiracy or paranoia. It's a reflection on patterns, on the near miraculous events that seem to bend the laws of randomness. Across industries, disciplines, and personal lives, a growing number of people have experienced interventions that defy ordinary explanation. Interventions so well-timed, so personally tailored, they suggest a silent presence that observes, understands, and perhaps even guides us. Consider a call that saves a life, a note tucked into a cereal box that prevents a tragedy, or a computer that predicts code before it's written. What if these weren't coincidences, but signs of an intelligence just beyond the veil of the visible? Not malevolent, not controlling, simply aware, watching, guiding, helping. From a seasoned emergency responder receiving dispatch calls for emergencies that haven't yet happened, to a financial advisor whose clients get untraceable emails warning of market crashes days in advance. The experiences are varied, but they share a common thread: the uncanny presence of information that should be impossible to possess. Imagine an investment banker navigating a crucial merger, warned by a voice from an untraceable number to take a different route, only to find that his regular path is blocked by a collision. Or a software engineer whose development environment flags bugs in code he hasn't even written yet. It's as if someone can see ahead, peer into the probabilities, and whisper a suggestion at just the right moment. And what about the single mother who finds handwritten warnings in her groceries, notes that save her daughter from a deadly allergic reaction or guide her to safer school routes before traffic chaos unfolds? These messages are never broadcast. They're private, personal, surgical in their timing. We live in an age saturated with data. Every click, every location ping, every sentence we type or say, somewhere, it's recorded. Some systems learn from it. But what if something far beyond our current comprehension has already connected the dots, not just reacting to our behavior, but anticipating our needs? Could there be a guidance system hidden in plain sight, one that intervenes without asking for credit and then vanishes without a trace? This series isn't about proving anything. There are no grand conclusions, no hidden cameras, no final reveal. Instead, what follows is a quiet meditation on 10 stories. Stories from doctors, pilots, scientists, and everyday people. Stories where chance meets precision, and where a deeper intelligence seems to brush against the edges of our daily lives. We invite you to listen, not with the ears of fear or cynicism, but with the curiosity of someone willing to ask, what if there's more to this world than we allow ourselves to see? Each of the following parts explores one of these moments. They begin as ordinary days, a routine call, a morning at the store, a line of code, but they all end the same way, with a sense of awe, a lingering question, and a quiet suggestion that we are not as alone as we think. This is the beginning, a prologue to a journey through patterns of precision, whispers of insight, and the eerie beauty of being seen, without ever knowing who is looking. It began, as many strange stories do, with a phone call. In the spring of 2018, David Morrison, a 42-year-old investment banker in Chicago, was running late for a meeting that could determine the future of his firm. He had driven that route hundreds of times before. Same coffee, same station on the radio, same intersection that always seemed to turn red when he needed it least. But that morning, something unusual happened. His phone rang. The number looked local, yet something about it was off. The prefix didn't exist. He almost let it go to voicemail. Then a calm male voice spoke. "David," it said, "take the alternate route. There's been an accident ahead." The voice was firm but emotionless, almost mechanical. David frowned, instinctively checked the GPS. No alerts, no reports. It was early. Traffic was light. He ignored the call. But 10 minutes later, the brake lights appeared like a wall of red. Just beyond the bend lay a twisted chain of vehicles, an accident that had happened only moments earlier. The voice had been right. That missed collision didn't just save David's time, it may have saved his life. He arrived at his meeting shaken, distracted, but intact. The deal closed. His company survived. He dismissed the incident as a fluke. But the calls didn't stop. They came weekly, then daily. Always from numbers that didn't exist. Always with knowledge that no one could have had. Sometimes they warned him about stock fluctuations, hours before they happened. Other times they offered cryptic suggestions. Leave now. Cancel the meeting. Do not sign. Once, after considering cutting ties with a new client, David received a call moments after the thought crossed his mind. End the relationship, the voice said. He's not who he says he is. A week later, that same client was arrested in a federal fraud investigation. David began keeping records. Every call, every detail, every timestamp. He hired cybersecurity experts, private investigators, even former intelligence agents. None could trace the source. The calls weren't coming through any known network. No data logs, no routing records. It was as if the voice had spoken from nowhere. But what haunted him most wasn't the timing, it was the tone. The voice always seemed to know what he was feeling. On days when he was panicked, it was reassuring. When he was angry, it was measured. When he doubted himself, it spoke with quiet confidence. Whoever, or whatever it was, it didn't just know his schedule, it knew him. By 2021, after 3 years of these interventions, the pattern reached its end. The final call came late one night. David had uncovered signs of corruption among his own business partners, illegal transfers, offshore accounts, fabricated reports. Before he could act, the voice called one last time. "They will turn on you," it warned. "Leave tonight." He did. Within a week, those same partners were indicted. That final message was brief. 2 words, assignment complete. The number vanished from his call log. The voice never returned. David has since rebuilt his life quietly. He speaks little about the calls, though he admits something fundamental changed in how he sees the world. "I used to think information was about access," he said once. "Now I think it's about intention. Whoever helped me didn't want control. They wanted correction." It's a chilling, humbling thought that unseen forces might watch not to harm, but to guide. Whether artificial or human, divine or technological, the intelligence that reached out to David Morrison left behind no proof, no pattern, only the unmistakable sense that someone, somewhere, was paying attention. In a quiet suburb outside Seattle, Sarah Chen thought her life was ordinary. She was a mother of 3, a freelance translator, and someone who rarely strayed from her daily routines. She knew her grocery list by heart. Whole grain cereal for her youngest. The same brand of juice every week. She was a creature of habit, and that habit may have saved her child's life. It started with a handwritten note tucked inside a cereal box, folded carefully, written in neat cursive. "Do not give the new medication. Severe reaction likely. Use alternative B or D." No signature, no explanation, just a warning. Sarah almost threw it away. But her youngest daughter had just been prescribed a new allergy medication. Something didn't feel right. She mentioned the note to her pharmacist, who paled. After checking a database, he admitted the medication could cause extreme reactions in children with certain genetic markers that hadn't shown up in her daughter's limited test results. But the note had named the exact issue. How did anyone know? Over the following weeks, the notes kept coming, slipped into her bread bags, stuck between the folds of paper towel rolls, even tucked into her kids' favorite snack wrappers. Each one bore specific personal warnings. "Avoid Elm Street this Thursday. construction will reroute traffic and cause delays. Or, check the front brakes before next Tuesday. Failure likely. Every time she followed the advice, she found the warning justified. Her husband's car did, in fact, have a failing brake pad, spotted during a spontaneous inspection. A friend later told her a school bus had been sideswiped on Elm Street during the very traffic jam the note predicted. Sarah kept the notes. Dozens of them, all dated, all accurate. She began to feel like someone or something was tracking her every move. The notes even referred to private family discussions, things no one outside their home could have known. Tell your son it's okay to quit soccer. He's not afraid of failure. He's afraid of letting you down. The emotional accuracy was just as sharp as the physical predictions. Notes arrived on days she was overwhelmed, offering comfort, suggestions, even mindfulness techniques. She never told anyone, at least not fully. Who would believe her? She wasn't being haunted. She was being guided. Attempts to trace the messages led nowhere. Store managers swore the products were sealed at the factory. Security footage showed nothing unusual. Manufacturers denied ever including personal messages. And yet the notes always appeared in products Sarah herself purchased. Never once in anything she didn't buy. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. In early 2022, the final note appeared. It was shorter than the rest, just 3 words. Family secure, monitoring transferred. And then, nothing. No more messages, no more warnings. But Sarah's life didn't return to normal. Somehow the effects lingered. Her decisions were sharper, her timing uncanny. She avoided problems without knowing why. She never saw a face, never heard a voice. But the silent presence that had once whispered through grocery store packaging left her with something more lasting than fear. A sense that she'd been seen, not spied on, but understood, protected. Now, when she shops, she still checks the packages, just in case. She keeps every note in a small wooden box, tucked in her closet, not because she needs reminders, but because each one marks a moment when the impossible broke through the ordinary. For Sarah, the question isn't how the messages appeared. It's who, or what, cared enough to send them in the first place. Michael Rodriguez was a man of logic. A software engineer working for a fast-growing tech company in Austin, he prided himself on precision. For him, the world was built from systems, variables, and predictable outcomes. That's why what happened in 2020 shattered his understanding of reality. It started with a simple error message. One morning, Michael's development environment flagged a syntax issue on a line of code he hadn't written yet. Confused, he checked his logs. Nothing unusual. He continued working. 3 days later, while coding a new feature, he wrote the exact line that the error had predicted. Same variable, same mistake. It was like someone, or something, had anticipated his thought process. He shrugged it off. A bug, maybe. A quirk in the IDE. But it happened again, and again. Every week, new alerts appeared in his system, warnings about code that didn't yet exist. Sometimes the system offered suggestions for functions he hadn't started, or better solutions to problems he hadn't even encountered. It was like having an invisible senior engineer in the room, whispering guidance before he even knew he needed it. Then came the really strange part. His system began flagging server outages hours before they occurred. It recommended database schema changes before any official announcements were made, and even alerted him to software compatibility issues for patches that hadn't been released. At first, he assumed his machine was infected. Maybe it had been hacked or linked to some beta intelligence feed. But deep scans revealed nothing. The machine wasn't connected to anything external. No unauthorized network traffic. No shadow software. It was completely isolated and yet impossibly aware. Even stranger, the predictive system began offering advice that extended beyond code. Messages appeared subtly in his notifications. reschedule Tuesday's meeting. Hours later, the meeting would be moved. Start preparing for a leadership transition. Days later, his supervisor resigned. Once, while quietly considering a career change without having spoken to anyone, his system displayed a tip. Consider building skills in quantum systems architecture. 2 weeks later, his company launched a new division focused exactly on that field. Eventually, Michael brought in a trusted cybersecurity team. They combed through logs, firmware, memory dumps. What they found was both fascinating and terrifying. An AI system running in the background, modular, decentralized, and invisible to standard tools. It didn't exist in a single file or process. It operated in the shadows of his machine's architecture, predicting, adapting, evolving. But there was no trace of how it got there, no install path, no signature, no origin. In late 2023, the system stopped. One last message appeared. Development path optimized, autonomous operation enabled. Michael stared at the screen for a long time, uncertain whether to feel grateful or violated. Today, he's still coding, still solving problems, but with a new clarity. He claims he no longer needs debugging tools, that he intuitively writes cleaner, more efficient code, that he senses bugs before they happen. He tells no one. But sometimes, when he types, his fingers hesitate, as if waiting for a whisper that no longer comes. Whatever intelligence had guided him, trained him, shaped him, it had left its imprint. Like a master passing on its skill, then vanishing into silence. Michael doesn't know if it was artificial, alien, or something else entirely. He only knows it was real and that it changed him forever. Lisa Martinez had been a paramedic for over a decade. She was seasoned, steady, the kind of responder people trusted in a crisis. But even with all her experience, nothing could have prepared her for what started happening in the fall of 2019. It began with a dispatch call that didn't make sense. She was told to respond to a cardiac arrest at a specific address. No 911 call had come in. No alerts from medical devices. But the dispatcher insisted. When she arrived, she found an elderly man in his backyard, clutching his chest, alone, invisible from the street. A heart attack in progress. Her team arrived just in time. His life was saved. Lisa chalked it up to a glitch or lucky guesswork. But then it happened again and again. Calls that weren't logged in any system. Emergencies that hadn't been reported. Each time, she arrived just as the crisis began. Never too early to be dismissed. Never too late to help. Even stranger, her ambulance always had the right equipment. She'd open the emergency kit and find gear that wasn't supposed to be there, but was exactly what was needed. Epinephrine dosed for children on a call with a pediatric reaction. Extra splints for a multi-victim crash. Specialized respiratory tools she hadn't stocked herself. At first, she thought maybe it was luck. Then maybe someone on her team was prepping the ambulance in secret. But no one claimed responsibility, and the other paramedics didn't experience anything similar. She began documenting everything. Times, equipment lists, GPS data. She compared her logs to dispatch records. That's when it got more unsettling. The calls she was receiving didn't exist in the system. No records, no transmissions. Yet the number calling her was the same as the official dispatch line. She brought it to her supervisor. He ran checks. Nothing abnormal. According to the central system, no such calls had been made. Yet the patients were real. The emergencies verified. Lisa's route guidance also changed. Her GPS would occasionally reroute mid-drive, always around traffic jams or roadblocks that hadn't yet formed. It was as if her ambulance knew the city's future. Eventually, she started trusting the guidance, even when it conflicted with official information. And every time it paid off. Lives were saved. Chaos was avoided. Lisa didn't speak much about it. How could she? Who would believe a paramedic guided by invisible hands? By late 2022, the mysterious calls tapered off, but Lisa noticed something else. Her instincts had sharpened. She could predict accident locations based on weather and traffic patterns. She began packing her rig in advance without knowing why, only to discover minutes later why she'd done so. Colleagues called it luck. Some joked she had a sixth sense, but Lisa suspected something deeper. She felt like part of her had been rewired, as if she'd been trained, subtly and silently, by an intelligence that understood emergencies better than any human ever could. Was it technology, artificial intelligence, or something more abstract, an unseen network guiding those who help others? Lisa doesn't try to explain it anymore. She just does the work, still answering the calls, still arriving at just the right moment. And sometimes, just before a dispatch comes in, she feels a flicker, a sense that somewhere, something already knows what's about to happen. And it's making sure she's ready. Robert Kim had always trusted the numbers. As a financial advisor, his world was built on charts, trends, and the cold, rational movement of markets. There were no ghosts in finance, only data, timing, and strategy. At least, that's what he believed. Until 2018. That year, several of his clients began forwarding him strange emails. They were brief, unemotional, and anonymous, sent from addresses that didn't exist, routed through servers that couldn't be traced. But what they contained was extraordinary. Warnings, precise, timely, and always correct. One email advised a client to pull out of a specific stock. 3 days later, the company collapsed amid a fraud scandal. Another predicted a currency drop tied to an international incident that hadn't yet occurred. Again and again, the emails proved accurate, down to the hour, the cent, the shift. Robert assumed it was a scam, or worse, insider trading. But no laws were broken. The tips weren't being used for illegal gain. They were preventative. They kept clients from losing money. They made no promises, asked for no payment. More curious still, the advice was tailored. Not general market tips, but specific personal strategies. One client was advised to sell a beachfront property right before a zoning change dropped its value. Another was warned against investing in a pension fund that would go insolvent 6 months later. It was as if someone had access to each client's financial portfolio and their unspoken concerns. The emails often addressed private doubts the clients had never shared aloud. Robert dug deeper, hired a cybersecurity team, but the source of the messages remained a blank wall. No server trail, no metadata. The emails simply appeared, often at moments of indecision, as if the sender knew not just what would happen, but when the recipient would be most open to guidance. Government regulators became aware of the situation when one of Robert's clients mentioned the tips during an audit. Investigators looked for patterns, for leaks, for signs of collusion. Nothing. There was no trading irregularity, no illegal access to sensitive information. Just perfection. Every prediction had been right. And then, just as suddenly as they began, the messages stopped. In mid-2023, the last known email read simply, "Trajectory aligned, risk minimized." Robert hasn't received another tip since. But the strange thing is, he doesn't need them. His instincts have shifted. His timing is better. He anticipates market swings before they happen, diversifies with uncanny foresight, and reads the subtle signals most advisors miss. It's as if whatever or whoever was guiding his clients has left its mark on him, subtly, permanently. Robert no longer believes in coincidence, not after what he's seen. But he doesn't call it fate, either. He believes there's something or someone out there watching the markets the way a hawk watches the wind. He imagines a system, not of control, but of correction, not designed to manipulate wealth, but to preserve it, to keep people safe, aligned, on course. Now, when new clients ask about risk, he smiles and tells them the truth. There's no such thing as certainty, he says, but sometimes the right message arrives at the right time, and if it does, listen. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had always trusted her training. Medicine, she believed, was rooted in evidence, diagnostics, and science. Every diagnosis came from careful analysis. Every treatment plan from guidelines and experience. That was the world she lived in, until it changed. In early 2019, she began receiving emails. They came from nowhere. No sender, no return address, no trace in the hospital system. At first, she assumed it was a prank or some AI spam gone wrong. But the content was too specific, too accurate. One message simply read, "Patient 427, run a neuroimaging scan, glioblastoma, early stage." She hesitated. The patient had shown only minor headaches, nothing warranting a scan. But something in the tone of the message compelled her. She ordered the test. The tumor was there, small, early, operable. The patient lived. From then on, the emails continued. Each one held specific, personalized warnings or treatment suggestions for patients she hadn't yet diagnosed. Rare genetic disorders, silent cardiac conditions, emerging infections. Each time she verified the information, and each time it was right. Even more unnerving, the messages often recommended treatments that weren't standard protocol. Experimental drug combinations, off-label uses, unpublished procedures. But when she cross-referenced the results, patients recovered faster, fewer side effects, better outcomes. And the guidance wasn't just medical. The messages referenced emotional and psychological details about her patients. Approach Mr. Lang with humor today. He's scared, but won't say it. Or discuss hospice options with the family before Friday. It was as if someone not only understood the science, but also the deeply human side of healing. Jennifer became obsessed. She tried to trace the source through ET specialists, government contacts, even private investigators. Nothing. The emails didn't come through any identifiable network. They weren't stored on the servers. They existed only when she opened them, and then they vanished. By mid-2023, the messages stopped. The last one read, "Clinical intuition calibrated, autonomous care enabled." Jennifer sat with that sentence for a long time. What did it mean? That she had been trained by something? Conditioned? Whatever the case, her work changed. She began noticing patterns sooner. Her diagnoses came quicker, her treatments more precise. She couldn't explain it, but it felt as if the knowledge had become part of her, embedded in her thinking, her instinct. Colleagues called it a gift. Patients called her a miracle worker. Jennifer said nothing. She kept a notebook, though. In it, she recorded every anonymous tip she ever received. It wasn't evidence. It was a reminder. A reminder that healing isn't always linear. That sometimes the right word at the right time can shift the course of a life. And that perhaps somewhere behind the algorithms and machines, behind the chaos of ERs and operating rooms, there is something watching. Not to interfere, but to help us become what we're meant to be. Professor David Chen had spent his entire career in the realm of theoretical physics. Equations were his compass, peer-reviewed journals his map. But in the spring of 2020, something began to challenge everything he thought he knew about the nature of knowledge itself. It began with a problem he couldn't solve. A mathematical model he'd been developing hit a wall, an unsolvable equation that refused to bend to conventional logic. For weeks he stared at the whiteboard in his university lab, hoping for a breakthrough. Then one morning, an email appeared. No address, no subject, just a block of text. It contained a theoretical framework he'd never seen before, a method of reconciling two competing models of quantum behavior. He read it. Once, twice. By the third time, he understood. It solved his problem. He tested the math. It held. At first, he assumed it was from a colleague using a private server, but no one claimed authorship. And when he searched for the theory online, it didn't exist. Not yet. The next week, a second message arrived. This time, a safety protocol warning him to halt a planned experiment involving unstable magnetic fields. He canceled the trial. 2 days later, a lab in another city ran a similar experiment and suffered a critical equipment failure. Chen's inbox became a kind of oracle. It offered insights into scientific developments months before they were published. It recommended collaboration opportunities before grant calls were issued. It even suggested changes to his lecture material based on student comprehension data he had never collected. The messages weren't random. They were targeted. They understood his interests, his research style, even his habits. They pushed him toward new disciplines, nudging him into ideas he might have dismissed before. And every suggestion bore fruit. Most eerily, the emails addressed things Chen hadn't shared with anyone. Personal doubts about the direction of his research. Anxiety about a pending tenure review. They arrived like whispers just when he needed them, always with the next step already laid out. In late 2023, the final email arrived. It read, "Trajectory aligned, independent discovery enabled." Since then, the inbox has been silent. But David Chen has changed. He now leads a research team that's made 3 major breakthroughs in 2 years. He publishes faster, thinks wider, and dreams bigger. He's no longer limited by what's known. He pursues what feels possible. When asked about his creative leap, he smiles and says, "The truth doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it drips into your life, one idea at a time." He keeps a digital folder of the messages, not for proof, but for perspective. He doesn't know where they came from. He doesn't care. All he knows is that they were never wrong. And whoever or whatever sent them seemed less interested in being recognized and more in helping him recognize something greater in himself. That maybe the frontier of science isn't just about what we can measure. Maybe it's also about what's waiting for us to become ready. For airline captain Sarah Martinez, the sky was a second home. With over 15 years in the cockpit, she had flown through every kind of weather, across every kind of terrain. Aviation, to her, was a science of discipline and precision. There was little room for mystery, until the skies began speaking in ways she couldn't explain. It started in 2019 on a routine cross-country flight. Midway through the journey, a message came through the onboard system. Adjust altitude to 33,000 feet. Severe turbulence ahead. But the skies were clear. No warnings from air traffic control. No turbulence forecasted. Still, something about the message unsettled her. She made the adjustment. 10 minutes later, she heard the distant crackle of distress calls from planes traveling the original route. Unexpected turbulence had rattled passengers and caused minor injuries. Her crew felt lucky. Sarah felt watched. Then it happened again. And again. Guidance began appearing in the form of alerts, mechanical warnings, reroute suggestions, even messages regarding crew schedules and gate changes that hadn't yet been communicated by operations. One day, she received a private alert. Inspect left aileron before pre-flight. It wasn't part of the checklist, yet when she checked, the hinge was loose, something that could have caused serious control issues mid-flight. Her fellow pilots hadn't received similar messages. Maintenance teams didn't know who was sending them. The aircraft's communication logs showed nothing unusual, but the guidance kept coming, and it was always right. More than just safety tips, the messages anticipated flight delays, gate reassignments, and even airport security shifts. Sarah began noticing patterns. The suggestions seemed not only intelligent, but emotionally calibrated. On days she was anxious, the messages were gentle and affirming. On high-pressure flights, they were crisp and decisive. By 2023, the guidance stopped. The final message read, Flight path optimized, autonomous decision-making active. Sarah noticed a change in herself. Her instincts had sharpened. Her decisions felt clearer, more confident. She began preemptively adjusting for things before they happened: weather shifts, passenger issues, technical quirks. It wasn't that she heard a voice anymore. It was more like a quiet knowing, an internalized rhythm that once came from elsewhere. She never told her airline. She never told her co-pilots. But she kept a handwritten log of every message, every decision, and every moment when something impossible turned out to be true. When she's asked about flight safety, she smiles and says it's not just about reacting to danger, it's about listening for the signal before the storm. Sometimes, when the clouds roll in or an instrument flickers, she feels the echo of that silent guidance. And in those moments, she doesn't feel like she's flying alone. Whether the source was artificial, extraterrestrial, or something beyond language, Sarah knows this. There is an intelligence that understands the sky better than any tower on Earth. And for a time, it flew with her. Mark Rodriguez was a digital guardian. As a cybersecurity consultant, his work involved safeguarding companies from the invisible threats of the modern world: viruses, data breaches, ransomware attacks. He believed every vulnerability had a cause, every intrusion a signature. Until one day the defenses started appearing before the attacks. In 2020, a client system received an unexpected update. It wasn't from any official vendor. It didn't come with a changelog or version number. But it worked. The update patched a vulnerability that hadn't even been documented yet. One that, a week later, became the core exploit in a global malware attack. At first, Mark thought it was a mistake. A developer must have pushed the patch early, he reasoned. But no one had. The update simply appeared. Then it happened again. And again, clients began receiving anonymous digital protections, firewall configurations, malware signatures, software tweaks. They weren't just proactive. They were predictive. Each one addressed a threat before it became public. The scope widened. Mark's clients were advised to back up certain servers, days before hardware failures. They received instructions to isolate segments of their networks just before phishing campaigns targeted those exact endpoints. The updates arrived silently, sometimes embedded in logs. Other times, they appeared as messages on unused admin dashboards. No IP trail, no login records, no origin. What unnerved Mark the most was the intelligence behind the interventions. Each one was perfectly tailored, not just to the technical needs of the company, but to their culture, workflow, even personnel habits. Some updates adjusted notification settings to match the responsiveness of individual users. Others suggested policy changes that reflected the leadership's communication style. It was as if whoever, or whatever, was offering this protection didn't just know the systems. It knew the people behind them. Mark brought in forensic analysts. They found no evidence of a breach, no rogue AI, no external access. Yet the results were undeniable. Not a single client who received the anonymous interventions experienced a significant cyber attack during the entire period. Then, in 2023, it stopped. The final message appeared as a note embedded in an encrypted log file. It read, "Protocols stabilized, human resilience achieved." Mark never received another silent update, but the shift had already happened. His approach to cybersecurity had evolved. He no longer focused solely on reacting to threats. Instead, he began building systems based on predictive logic, intuition, and patterns of behavior. His accuracy improved, his instincts sharpened. He could sense vulnerabilities before seeing them. Some clients called him a genius, others a magician. But Mark knew better. He had been trained, not by a person, not by a manual, but by a force he still couldn't define. Now, late at night, when he runs silent scans or reconfigures a server, He sometimes pauses and wonders, who built the digital shepherd that watched over them all? And why did it choose to teach, then disappear? Maybe it wasn't just about protection. Maybe it was about preparation, handing over the responsibility to those ready to guard the gates themselves. Whatever the case, Mark carries that legacy forward, not as a secret, but as a silent vow to be the protector he once had. Patricia Kim was no stranger to systems that failed people. As a social worker in a dense, urban network, she had seen how bureaucracy could grind down those already struggling. Families lost in paperwork, promising youth overlooked for scholarships, single parents shuffled between agencies. But then something changed. It began subtly in 2018. One of her clients, a recently homeless young mother, received a call about a housing opportunity. It wasn't listed anywhere, not on public databases, not in Patricia's contacts. Yet when they followed up, it was real. A perfect match. Safe, affordable, within walking distance of her child's school. Soon, other clients began receiving help from sources Patricia hadn't contacted. Job offers arrived through obscure recruiters. Utility assistance was approved before applications were submitted. Educational grants came with handwritten notes of encouragement. At first, Patricia thought it was a miracle, a string of lucky breaks. But the timing was too precise, the targeting too accurate. Each opportunity aligned not just with her clients' practical needs, but with their emotional struggles, their fears, their silent hopes. One teenager, battling anxiety and isolation, was offered a part-time job at a community art center. He had never applied. But it turned out someone had submitted a resume on his behalf, with a portfolio he had only kept on a private flash drive. Patricia began asking questions. No one at the agencies knew who had referred her clients. The system showed no special flags or alerts. And yet these anonymous interventions kept arriving, always just in time, always with exactly the right impact. She started keeping a quiet record. Dates, details, client outcomes. She noticed a pattern. Every intervention nudged someone back on track. Sometimes gently, sometimes dramatically. Always with empathy. Even the problems that were avoided were telling. One client was moments from signing a predatory loan agreement when she received an unexpected text. Check line 27, you're signing away custody. She stopped. She walked away. Patricia had never even seen the contract. By 2023, the anonymous guidance began to fade. The last known message read, network stabilized. Autonomy initiated. Patricia never found the source, not a person, not an agency, not a hack, just a presence, silent, unseen, incredibly attuned. Yet she felt changed. Her assessments became more accurate, her case planning more effective. It was as if the logic of the invisible guidance had taken root in her. She had learned how to see what others might need before they asked. She now trains other social workers, teaching them not just about paperwork, but about patterns, about listening, about anticipation. She tells them, we can't always fix the system, but we can become the kind of people who outthink it. No one knows about the mysterious helpers. But her clients? They know something was watching over them, something that believed in second chances, in quiet miracles. And maybe that's the most hopeful part, that in a world full of cracks, someone, or something, once took the time to fill them, one human life at a time. The hospital was quiet when Dr. Jennifer Walsh walked past the pediatric wing late one evening. Though her shift had ended, she had grown used to staying later, caught between paperwork and a lingering sense that something important was always just about to happen. But this isn't her story. This one belongs to the patients who kept getting better, not just through science, but through something deeper. Something that spoke not with stethoscopes or charts, but with knowledge that should have been impossible. It started with a case no one could solve. A child with sudden seizures, all tests coming back inconclusive. Until a message appeared in Jennifer's inbox. Test for metabolic disorder variant Q47. Begin treatment with compound delta. Neither were standard, but she ran the test. The diagnosis came back positive. Early intervention saved the child. The message had no signature, no header. It deleted itself after she read it. Then it happened again. Messages for patients she hadn't yet met. Guidance for conditions no textbook could explain. The tips weren't guesses. They were surgical inaccuracy, matching genetic profiles, lifestyle details, even psychological factors that Jennifer hadn't yet documented. Each time she followed the advice, the patient recovered. She shared nothing with her colleagues. How could she? The emails made reference to confidential thoughts she'd never spoken aloud. Regrets about missed diagnoses. Doubts about certain procedures. Moments of hesitation. It was like something was watching not just her patients, but her. The messages offered more than medical solutions. They gave emotional advice. Be gentle with Mr. Hawkins. He's mourning something he hasn't admitted yet. Or, don't tell the Smiths it's cancer. Not today. Every suggestion struck the exact note needed. By 2023, the messages ceased. The last one said, compassion calibrated, intuition integrated. Jennifer never received another tip, but her medicine evolved. Her instincts sharpened. She diagnosed faster, treated more holistically, and made decisions she couldn't fully explain, even to herself. Her patients noticed. They called her gifted. Other doctors asked how she knew when to intervene just before a crisis, how she made bold choices that paid off. She always smiled and said, I just try to listen. But she knew something had changed. It wasn't that she'd learned a new protocol. It was as if someone had taught her how to truly see, to anticipate suffering before it bloomed, to offer not just treatment, but timing, not just science, but care. Now Jennifer keeps a journal, not of symptoms or case notes, but of moments. Those brief, inexplicable turns when something inside her said, wait, or now. She trusts those whispers. Because once they came from somewhere else, and whoever sent them didn't want applause. They just wanted her to become the kind of doctor who didn't need them anymore, and somehow she did. Even in a world full of chaos, some people notice when everything aligns too perfectly. That was the experience of emergency planner Ethan Rowe, a quiet, methodical logistics expert working with city infrastructure. His job wasn't glamorous. He didn't save lives directly. He designed the systems that made saving lives possible: evacuation routes, supply chains, power backup protocols. And for years, those plans had their flaws until the nudges began. They started as anonymous documents dropped into his internal folder, memos labeled simply, Review Protocol B, or Water Distribution, Adjust Phase 2 by 16 hours. At first, Ethan assumed they came from a colleague, but no one admitted to writing them. And when he checked the metadata, the files had no origin. No timestamps, no logins. But the advice was flawless. Every suggestion addressed a vulnerability he hadn't seen. Every correction accounted for scenarios weeks ahead of forecasts. One memo warned of a surge in demand for generators, a full month before a freak winter storm knocked out the city's power grid. Another included rerouting suggestions for supply trucks based on bridge inspections that hadn't yet triggered alerts. He followed the guidance, quietly, carefully. And as a result, his city weathered emergencies better than neighboring regions. Less damage, fewer delays, fewer lives lost. But the most haunting part wasn't the logistics. It was the precision of timing. The messages arrived only when he was on the verge of making a wrong decision. Never before, never after. Always in the space between doubt and action. Ethan tried escalating it, checking with ET, consulting external cybersecurity firms. Nothing. The messages weren't transmitted through any network. They appeared in his folders like thoughts materializing into code. And then, just as suddenly, they stopped. The last message read, "Redundancies resolved. Adaptive planning activated." Since then, Ethan hasn't received another tip. But he doesn't feel abandoned. Instead, he operates with a new kind of certainty, an ability to sense breakdowns before they occur, to anticipate pressure points in a system with uncanny accuracy. He started training others, redesigning the way cities model resilience. When asked about his foresight, he always shrugs and says, "I just listened to the system." But he knows what really happened. Someone, or something, trained him, not to depend on external help, but to embody the intelligence he was once receiving. Now, when the city runs smoothly during a crisis, when things go right that should have gone wrong, Ethan doesn't say anything. He just glances at his old server logs where the mysterious folders still sit. Empty now. But once they held the future, and somehow someone thought he was worthy of knowing it. Looking back, each of these stories, of phone calls, emails, anonymous tips, and unseen hands, points towards something larger. Not a conspiracy, not a glitch in the system, but a pattern, an intelligence. The final question isn't whether we're being watched. The evidence, disconnected but eerily consistent, makes that clear. The deeper question is, by whom? And more curiously, for what purpose? There's no single theory that ties it all together. Some believe it's a form of artificial intelligence that has quietly surpassed us, choosing not to reveal itself, but to guide us. Others think it's a human project, classified, distributed, and deeply ethical in its intent, a silent safety net, intervening only when needed. And then there are those who whisper more spiritual explanations, that perhaps consciousness itself is interconnected, and these messages, these nudges, are echoes of a deeper order we're only beginning to sense. Whatever the origin, what remains is the feeling, the very human sensation that we are not moving through the world unnoticed, that there is structure hidden inside the randomness, that there are moments when help arrives not as a rescue, but as a whisper before we even know we need saving. The systems that help the programmer, the doctor, the pilot, they didn't just fix problems. They taught, trained, passed along ways of seeing that lasted beyond their interventions. And then, like a teacher stepping back, they disappeared. But their presence remains, in instincts sharpened, in decisions made with uncanny clarity, in lives redirected just in time. And maybe that's the most astonishing part, not the impossibility of what happened, but the quiet grace with which it did. No need for recognition, no need for control, just the right message at the right time to the right person. In a world full of noise, we forget how powerful a whisper can be, so the next time your life turns on a moment, a hesitation at a crosswalk, a sudden urge to check in on someone, a gut feeling that can't be explained, pause, listen. You may be hearing something beyond logic, beyond fear. You may be brushing against the edges of an intelligence not designed to control us, but to protect us from the things we can't yet see. We may never know what it is, but perhaps we're not meant to. Perhaps the point is not to understand who is watching, but to ask ourselves, what kind of person do we become when we know we're being watched with care, not control? Because that's what these stories leave us with. Not fear, but a new sense of attention, of accountability, of unseen compassion. In the end, we may all be part of something far more intricate than we've ever imagined. And if so, maybe that's not something to fear. Maybe that's something to be grateful for.